You're never really going to know when you've made all your inferences, honestly. It's something that is kind of a judgment call based on the situation. And in terms of staying focused, I think it really relates to just doing one thing at a time and being systematic about what you're doing. So having a consistent, systematic approach for all your diagramming, and then going bit by bit when you draw your rules, as well as when you draw any hypotheticals, doing so with a method rather than haphazardly. For IDing the style of each game, and therefore the best approach for each game, I think you ID the style based on a combination of the initial paragraph and the rules. So the initial paragraph may involve putting things in order or grouping things into categories, and based on the tasks they're asking you to perform, that will automatically dictate the game type you're looking at. So you want to look at words that are synonymous with ordering or words that are synonymous with grouping. So grouping might be choosing or selecting or assigning. Ordering might be days of the week or rankings from 1 to 7 or best to worst or most to least or highest to lowest. All those relational words will dictate whether it's ordering or grouping. And then within ordering, you might have relative or strict. So relative would be a lot of the rules involving before versus after, and then strict involving assignments of variables to particular slots. Then you have combination games that involve both ordering and grouping. Then you have combinations, and I wouldn't overly obsess on the particular game type. Just focus on the task at hand, and you'll bring your previous knowledge to bear on whatever new game you're attempting. Someone talked about diagrams, making how many diagrams to make per game, because later questions introduce new diagrams to add. I'd say it's based on the circumstances once again. So you might make a few main diagrams at the outset, and then make more local diagrams based on the questions they're asking you. So if the question says, if X is on slot 3, and you've never seen that before, well, automatically draw a new diagram. I might draw as many as 7 or 8 diagrams for a particular game, maybe more, but also maybe less. And if you maximize your use of previous work, then you may not need to draw as many new diagrams going forward. And you can also make use of the initial orientation questions scenario to help you avoid having to draw a new one. You don't have to do the game's questions in order, and jumping around might let you use more previous work than you otherwise would have. So if a question, third question of the game is a general must be true, but questions 4 and 5 are local, you could do 4 and 5 first, then circle back to 3, and bring the previous knowledge of those other scenarios to help you solve question 3, the global one, more easily. So I would definitely agree with you on that. There was one other question about how to quickly assess which games to do if you're only going to do 3. And that's tough. I don't think it's necessarily that obvious at the outset which game to skip, which game will be the hardest. I think usually the first game is not the hardest, and usually the fourth game is not the easiest, but they vary. The second game could be hardest, or third or fourth could be the hardest, and I think it's based partially on your preference for certain game types over others. If you can see that it's a game type you don't like, then obviously make that the one you skip. You could potentially choose the game with the fewest questions to skip, because that will mean you're not getting as much out of your investment up front in making diagrams. But at the same time, you make good diagrams up front, you could blast through the questions pretty quickly. So there's not really an easy answer on that. I'd say if a game looks like a curveball to you and you've done curveball games before, then that would probably be the one to skip. A curveball game being a weird game that doesn't cleanly fit within a classic category of games and only has a few rules, not many inferences up front, a lot more applying general principles over the course of the game again and again. Anything like a pattern game, those are typically harder. And so if that's what you encounter and you don't like those, you might save that for last. But I would do the orientation question at the very least, because those are typically a gimme. So if you see an orientation question, I would still do that one anyway, because it's simply, most of the time it's usually just straightforwardly applying the rules, not much that you need to bring additionally to that in terms of your understanding.